the Finance Minister's speech. Busi Sibeko is an economist and researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. Stephen, you've got more with Busi.
Indeed, Kathy. Thank you, Busi Sibeko. Good evening to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. First, no wealth tax announced today, although there is a little bit of tax relief for what are described as middle and lower income job earners. How do you view that? Are you disappointed?
Absolutely. I am disappointed that our National Treasury can tell us that we must cut expenditure in other areas and at the same time not make the revenue possible to at least balance those who are social grant recipients. In a time of crisis where we know that unemployment has peaked at 7.2 million people, we are going to be cutting social grants, or rather National Treasury will be cutting social grants in real terms over the next 3 years, and that is extremely disappointing in terms of supporting the most vulnerable, who are women and children, and Black people particularly.
The government will say, and I imagine the Finance Minister will say, that in a way they had no choice. Government lost over 200 billion rand of revenue last year because of the lockdown and COVID-19. What else could they have done would be their argument.
I think they certainly, it's not about choices. The government has a duty to deliver on constitutional obligations, and National Treasury is not above that. And in fact, the budget that they've put forward to us, it's a political choice. It's not just a technical exercise, right? Austerity, which is cutting budget expenditure in particular, in this particular context, is a political decision. They could have looked at other revenue sources, one, and we've seen how, in fact, they've given more relief for the wealthier and the high income earners rather than actually garner the resources to make sure that people are given relief, or rather the poorer people in this country are given relief. And I think critically in this budget, they haven't explored all the possible domestic resource mobilization avenues, right? Even monetary policy. When we think about how South African Reserve Bank intervened last year and actually made government borrowing cheaper, why can't we keep implementing such monetary policy and fiscal policies that enable the government to be able to take care of this country adequately?
There has been a reduction in corporate tax, and the idea here is that government will basically make it easier for businesses to employ more people and make more money. In the end, as we know, and I'm not talking about trickle-down economics, what I'm talking about is job creation. Do you expect anything in this budget to actually help with job creation?
Well, yeah, that's a very difficult question, because I think ultimately when government is cutting its expenditure, which is 30% of GDP, think about how that's going to contract GDP or the economy in itself, right? Because we can't just think of government expenditure as this lone thing that happens elsewhere, because remember, there's real linkages. Government spends to procure. The procurement happens from business, right? So it is critical to think about those linkages first. But also, I think what I want to highlight is that after the financial crisis, what they found in the East Asian economies was that actually giving corporates tax breaks led to higher inequality. I think one of the biggest challenges we're going to face with this budget is the increasing inequality.
You talk about increasing inequality in a way, and I mean, governments around the world have this. It's basically trying to survive. Now, we have huge government debt, and we can talk about inequality. I completely agree with you, but we don't want that inequality to continue. We don't want the poverty to continue, unto the third generation. If we don't pay back some of that government debt, it will. Doesn't government also have a duty to make sure that some of the money it has is spent on paying back that debt, to ensure that the poverty is not sort of put into a situation where it continues, as it looks like it will, if that debt isn't paid?
Yeah, debt is obviously a concern, right? But it's actually not the absolute size of debt, but rather the debt servicing cost that we should be worried about. And also, it's important to understand that debt is a ratio that is compared to GDP. Right? So if you grow the economy, it means your debt to GDP ratio will decline over time. But I think it's important that we challenge this intergenerational approach that Treasury is trying to enforce on us, because we can't say that human rights matter less right now because human rights will be achieved in the future. That's actually what we're facing right now, because even in the budget itself, It says, for instance, that the National Treasury is aware that cutting expenditure in education in particular will lead to negative outcomes, particularly in no-fee paying schools. So is that the trade-off we're willing to make? To say people must suffer now so that in the future, supposedly, right, that things will turn out better? And I'd argue that they will not. In fact, it's not a short run pain, it's actually a long run pain, and we cannot justify that under any conditions.
Busi Sibeko, thanks very much indeed from the Institute for Economic Justice. Do appreciate the time. Well, more